Hale, now that we have uh, created displays for our data sets, now we are going to begin talking about important characteristics of those data sets, starting with where is the middle, where is the center. We call them measures of central tendency. You might have some familiarity with some of them, but it's good to go over those ones still. Here we have a data set of the number of nuclear reactors in the United States for 15 years. So we have 15 data points. So what I'd like you to do is pause here and get this data into a fresh Excel workbook page so that we can use it to calculate some measures of central tendency. So pause here and put that data into your Excel file. So hopefully you have the data in an Excel file. And now we can start talking about finding the measure of where are the different types of middles of this data set. The first measure of central tendency is the mean. This is what we know typically in school as an average. It's where we add all of our numbers, all of our values, and then n is the number of data points. We have two different means here. One is this thing that we call x bar, and the other one is the Greek letter mu. Both of those are means. X bar is a mean that we get from a sample, and mu is a mean that we get from a population. If you remember from the beginning of the year, we talked about the difference between a sample and a population. The population is what we want to know about the whole group. Sample is a smaller representative group from that population. Here, capital N again is the number of data points. So to calculate it a mean, we do the same thing we would do, if we were calculating test average, we'd add up the number or all of your test grades and divide by the number of tests you took. So if we look at our data set, there are a couple ways we can calculate the mean. One way is, and I'm going to put a title for mean here, and I might as well put it all the way at the top. In this cell, we can hit the equals key, and then we can type the word sum, and you can see that it gives us an option, sum adds numbers, and it'll give us a parentheses, and then we can highlight all of our data points, close the parentheses. When we do a mean, we're adding everything up and dividing by the total we have. So then we could then divide by 14 data points. And we would get a mean. The other way we could do it is we could say equals and type average. Select our data points and hit enter, and it will give us the mean. So the mean is not always a data point. A lot of times it is a decimal point. This is giving us the average, in this case, the average number of nuclear reactors in the United States. So that is one measure of the center of data. Another measure, which you might have some familiarity with, is the median. It is the literal middle of the data. So if we order our data from smallest to biggest, the value in the middle is the median. If we have an odd number of data, the middle will be one of our data points. If we have an even number of data, we'll find the two data points in the middle and then take the average of those or find the value that's right in between them. Sometimes we refer to it as MED or MD, median. So we can do that on our calculator as well. One thing we could do is we could sort our data like we have done in the past. I don't have a header on mine this time. It'll sort it from smallest to biggest. We have 14 data points. So we have an even number. So half of my data points is 7 data points. So that means if I look between the 7th and the 8th data point, that'll be my median. Since my 7th and 8th data point are the same number, my median is going to be 109. If we have a very large data set, that might be a little tedious. So we can hit equals and start typing median, and you can see that it gives us an option. And we don't always have to highlight. We can type the cell. So we want to go from A1 to A14, and it'll give us our median, which is the same thing we found. Again, another one I think you probably have some familiarity with is the mode. Mode sort of sounds like most. The mode is the value that occurs the most in a data set. It might be important to us to know, hey, which individual value occurred most frequently? That is the mode. So in a smaller data set, we can count up which one shows up the most. We have 5 104s, 4 109. So it sounds like mode is 104. That is the number of nuclear reactors that shows up the most. Again, in a very large data set, that might be really tedious to do. So we can hit equals. Mode even tells you it's going to give us the most frequent value. And we get 104. So we can do it by hand or just by counting, or we can use the algorithm in Excel. All of these are measures of central tendency, the middle of our data set. One more that you may not have heard of before is the mid-range. This is an estimate of where the middle is. The median, we actually find the very middle of our data set. The mid-range is something that we can calculate easily. We don't have to organize the data. We just have to know the biggest and smallest value. If we add them together and divide by 2, that gives us the mid-range, which is an estimate of the middle of our data. So let's do that one as well. So in my cell here, I can hit equals, and then in parentheses, I'm going to take my largest number plus my smallest number, close my parentheses, and then I'm going to divide by 2. And it is going to give me a mid-range of 108. So as you can see, every single one of these measures of central tendency is different for this data set. And so we will want to use one of these depending on what our data set looks like. I am actually going to skip over this and come back to it because I want to talk about when we should use which type of measure. So I made a list here of pros and cons. This is we could probably add to these, but these are some important pros and cons. The one thing that's important about the mean is that it takes every single data point into account because you are adding all of the data points together. For all of the other ones, we aren't necessarily taking all of the data points into account. The median, we are just finding the middle. The mode, we're just looking at the data point that showed up the most. And the mid-range is, again, just finding the middle. But in this case, we're estimating rather than being direct about it and finding the median. The mean becomes difficult to use when we have extreme values. So if we would have one value that's very high or one value that's very low, it's going to greatly change our mean because, again, it's taking all the data points into account, which means we're taking this really large or really small number and adding it into our calculation, and it is what we call skew the way we see our center. So from a picture standpoint, if we were to actually make histograms of data sets, if they looked similar to these are a few different shapes that show up. This one right here, I'd like to draw a little curve over it. This is a symmetric shape Whenever we have a histogram, what we would call a distribution that is approximately symmetric or looks close to symmetric, all of these measures of central tendency are going to be very close, if not the same. And so we would always go ahead and use the mean then to describe where is the center. Whenever we have a skewed data set, this is right skewed. A skewed data set sort of has this tail here, and we name it based on which side is the tail on. So this tail is on the right. This one is on the left. So in this right skewed data set, we have some values that are larger than the majority of the values. A lot of our data points are over here, but we have some that are much larger. Over here, majority of our data points are on the higher end, but we have some that are smaller. And so what tends to happen there is our mean, as you can see in this picture, gets dragged, or pulled is probably a nicer word, pulled towards the skew. So my right skew with this tail over here is pulling my mean to the right. It's making it bigger than my median and mode. When I have a left skew, it's pulling it to the left. It's making it smaller than my median and mode. In this case, we would want to use the median to determine the center of our data. So different measures of tendency based on the way our histogram or distribution looks. And you would want to choose mean for a symmetric distribution. And for a skewed distribution, we would want to talk about the median as our measure of the center. So let's go back and talk about some grouped data. So something that we looked at before when we had boundaries and then frequencies. The one thing we can find out about these is the mode, and we can also find out about the mean of this one on the left. So in both of these, we can find the mode just by looking at the frequency that is the biggest. And so in my table on the left, my modal group is this class from 15.5 to 20.5. And here my modal group is soft drinks. The other thing we can find out about this table on the left is the mean. So what I would like you to do, actually, let me go back, is pause here, and I'd like you to get these two columns into Excel. So hopefully you got those columns into Excel. What we're going to do is we're going to find the midpoint of each of these groupings like we did previously. And so the midpoint here is going to be 18, and then 23, and then 28. Okay, if you have trouble finding the midpoint, just let me know. We are going to then multiply our midpoint by the frequency. We're going to estimate that every data point in each of these groups is approximately the midpoint, and so we'll multiply the frequency by the midpoint. And I can actually say equals. I can select that cell, hit my asterisk, and select that cell, and it will multiply them together. And then if I click down here on this corner where there's that little square, I can drag that down, and it will complete my calculations for me. And finally, I can type in here that I want to find the average of those cells, and I have to hit the equal sign first. I want to find the average of those cells, and it will tell me 111. So we're able to estimate the average for a data set, even if we don't have all the individual data points, but we do have the frequencies of the classes. We'll find the midpoint. We'll use that midpoint sort of as an average to find a total, and then we will get an average of all of those. final thing that we could talk about is a weighted mean, and I'm actually going to pause here and I'm going to go ahead and say, let's talk about this together in class. That was a lot in this lesson, finding multiple measures of central tendency, and then using group data to find a mean or modes. If you have any questions before you go ahead and try one on your own, please do ask. If not, I have a new data set about teacher salaries. I want you to find the mean, median, mode, and mid-range. And then I want you to think about which measure do you think would be best suited if teachers went to the school board and wanted a higher salary. As always, if you need help, please do ask, or you can ask a friend or a partner. Take your time and good luck on this.